3 hours before Ethan Miller forgot how to breathe in front of half the campus, he was standing in front of the cracked mirror above his dorm room sink, practicing the same careless smile that had saved him more times than he could count. The mirror lights buzzed softly, turning his pale face even paler, making his gray-blue eyes look sharper than they felt. He adjusted the collar of his white shirt, rolled his sleeves twice, then pressed 2 fingers against the scent blocker hidden beneath the cuff on his left wrist. It was still holding. For now, the small patch gave off almost nothing, just a plain, neutral scent that made him easier to ignore, and Ethan had spent most of his life believing that being ignored was safer than being wanted. Outside his window, the college town of Briar Ridge glowed under a late spring evening, all porch lights, maple trees, and distant music drifting from the fraternity houses near campus. Everyone was going to Mason Reed's end-of-semester party. Everyone was pretending finals had not nearly destroyed them. Everyone was ready to be loud, reckless, and young for one night. Ethan should have stayed home. He knew that. Parties were full of alphas who wore confidence like expensive jackets, omegas who could afford perfect blockers, and betas who never had to think about either. But Mason had texted him 6 times, then called him dramatic, which meant Ethan had no choice but to show up and prove he was not. That was his role. Ethan was the funny one, the fearless one, the one who could turn any awkward silence into a joke before anyone noticed his hands were shaking. By the time he reached the house, the front lawn was already crowded, red cups scattered across the porch rail, music pulsing hard enough to rattle the windows. Inside, warm air hit him first, mixed with soda, cheap cologne, vanilla candles, and the restless edge of alpha pheromones held just barely under control. Ethan smiled wider, because that was what he did when he wanted to run. "There he is," Mason shouted from the living room, throwing an arm around Ethan's shoulders. "The only person here brave enough to annoy Ryan Carter and survive." Laughter rose around them, and Ethan followed the sound before he followed the meaning. Then he saw Ryan. He was leaning against the far wall near the kitchen doorway, tall, quiet, and painfully calm in a black shirt that made his pale skin and dark hair look almost unreal under the blue party lights. Ryan Carter was not laughing. He rarely did. He held a bottle of water instead of a drink, watching the room with that steady alpha stillness that made louder people seem ridiculous. For 1 second, his eyes met Ethan's, and the noise around them thinned into something fragile. Ethan's smile almost slipped. Almost. Then he lifted his hand in a lazy salute and called across the room. "Try not to look so thrilled, Carter. People might think you have feelings." A few students laughed. Ryan only tilted his head, his mouth curving by the smallest degree. "Try not to talk so much, Miller. People might think you are nervous." The words were calm, but they landed too close to the truth. Ethan felt heat climb his neck. He laughed louder than necessary, because silence was dangerous, because honesty was worse, because Ryan had always been the one person who looked at him like the joke was not the whole story. Ryan Carter had built his entire reputation on control. At Briar Ridge University, people spoke about him the way they spoke about winter storms, with admiration, caution, and a little fear. He was the scholarship athlete who never missed morning practice, the honors student who could walk into an anatomy exam on 3 hours of sleep and still leave before everyone else, the alpha who never raised his voice because he never needed to. His father had been a respected doctor in Portland, Maine, the kind of man who believed discipline could cure almost anything. His mother had been even colder, a former debate champion who treated emotion like a weakness that needed to be corrected early. Ryan had learned young that an alpha who showed too much became dangerous to others, and an alpha who showed too little became lonely. He chose lonely. It was cleaner. It was safer. It kept his scent low, his hands steady, and his name out of trouble. On campus, that made him untouchable. Other students tried to impress him, provoke him, flirt with him, challenge him. Ryan met all of it with the same quiet stare and the same polite distance. He did not drink at parties. He did not crowd omegas. He did not use his presence to bend a room around him, even though everyone knew he could. That was why Ethan Miller confused him. Ethan did not behave like anyone else. He slipped through social circles like a spark through dry leaves, bright, quick, impossible to catch. He made jokes at the wrong moments and somehow made people love him for it. He acted fearless in rooms where Ryan could smell fear on him before Ethan even smiled. Most people heard Ethan laugh and thought he was made of sunlight. Ryan heard the thin edge beneath it. He noticed the way Ethan checked his wrist whenever alpha scent grew too heavy. He noticed how Ethan always stood near exits. He noticed how his clever mouth moved faster whenever someone got too close to the truth. Ryan should have looked away. He told himself that for months. Ethan was not asking to be seen, and Ryan had no right to see him anyway. Still, whenever Ethan entered a room, Ryan felt his attention move before he could stop it. Not because of instinct, not because of scent, not even because Ethan was beautiful in a restless, wounded way that made people want to protect him. It was because Ethan looked like someone who had been falling for a long time and had convinced everyone he was dancing. Across Mason Reed's crowded living room, Ethan was doing it again. He laughed, lifted his red cup without drinking from it, and let the group pull him deeper into the noise. Someone shoved the coffee table aside. Someone else dropped a stack of cards onto the rug and shouted for everyone to sit. Mason grinned at Ethan, then at Ryan, like he had just discovered the perfect match for a firework and a matchstick. Ryan felt the room tilt toward trouble before a single dare was spoken. The game began with the kind of careless confidence only college students had at midnight, when the whole semester felt far away and tomorrow did not seem real yet. Mason sat cross-legged on the rug with the stack of cards in one hand and a grin that promised bad decisions. Around him, students crowded onto the couch, the floor, the arms of chairs, anywhere they could fit. The music had been turned down just enough for voices to carry, but the bass still moved through the walls like a second heartbeat. Ethan lowered himself onto the edge of the couch beside a beta girl from his literature class and tried not to look at Ryan, who had remained near the kitchen doorway, as if the party were a storm he was studying from a safe distance. That distance bothered Ethan more than he wanted to admit. Ryan was always close enough to notice, never close enough to touch. It made Ethan reckless. It made him want to throw jokes like pebbles at a locked window just to hear something crack. The first few rounds were harmless. Someone admitted they had once copied a lab report and accidentally turned in the wrong file. Someone else had to sing the chorus of an old pop song while standing on the coffee table. A freshman confessed to having a crush on a teaching assistant and nearly disappeared into his hoodie from embarrassment. Ethan laughed at the right times, clapped when everyone clapped, and kept his hand casually over his left wrist. The blocker was still there, but the air in the room had grown heavier. Too many alphas, too much heat from bodies packed shoulder to shoulder, too many scents layered over one another until the edges blurred. Vanilla, cedar, citrus, rain, smoke, laundry soap, nerves. Ethan swallowed and told himself he was fine. He was always fine. Then Mason looked at him. That was the first warning. The second was the way Mason looked past him toward Ryan. Ethan, Mason said, stretching his name like he had been saving it. Truth or dare? Ethan should have chosen truth. Truth could be dodged with humor. Truth could be twisted. Truth could be buried under a bright enough laugh. But Ryan was watching now, those blue eyes steady and unreadable from across the room, and something foolish in Ethan lifted its chin. Dare, he said. The room reacted before Mason even spoke. A low wave of whistles, laughter, and knowing glances moved through the circle. Ethan's stomach tightened. Mason tapped the card against his knee, then smiled wider. 5 seconds, he said. Kiss Ryan Carter. The room exploded with noise. Someone shouted that it was perfect. Someone else said Ryan would probably turn to stone. Ethan laughed because everyone expected him to, but the sound came out thinner than usual. Across the room, Ryan did not move. He did not smile. He did not look offended, amused, or embarrassed. He only looked at Ethan, and in that stillness, the joke suddenly had weight. Ethan stood before he could change his mind. His legs felt steady, which was strange, because the rest of him did not. Every step across the living room seemed to stretch too long. The students blurred at the edges. The blue lights shimmered over Ryan's black shirt, over his pale throat, over the calm set of his mouth. Ethan stopped in front of him, close enough to catch the clean, restrained trace of Ryan's scent, winter air and quiet cedar. It cut through the crowded room with impossible clarity. Ethan forced a crooked smile. Relax, Carter, he said softly, because jokes were the only shield he had left. It is just 5 seconds. Ryan's gaze dropped to Ethan's wrist for less than a heartbeat, then returned to his face. His voice was low enough that only Ethan could hear it. Only do this if you want to. The words should have made it easier to laugh and back away. Instead, they made Ethan feel seen in a way that was almost unbearable. Behind him, the crowd started counting before anything had even happened. 5, 4. Ethan stepped closer. 3. Ryan stayed perfectly still, giving him every chance to stop. 2. Ethan lifted his hand, touched Ryan's shoulder lightly, and felt the warmth beneath the fabric. 1. Ethan closed the last inch between them, still pretending he was brave, still pretending his heart was not breaking open. For one impossible second, the whole room disappeared. Ethan had meant to make it quick, careless, another bright little performance that would earn laughter and let him walk away before anyone saw the truth. But the moment his mouth touched Ryan's, the world changed shape. There was no music, no counting, no crowded living room with sticky hardwood floors and red cups on the windowsill. There was only warmth, stillness, and the clean winter cedar scent of Ryan Carter breaking through every wall Ethan had built around himself. Ryan did not grab him. He did not push closer. He stayed steady, one hand hovering near Ethan's elbow without claiming it, giving Ethan space even in the middle of something that no longer felt like a dare. That restraint was what ruined Ethan most. If Ryan had laughed, Ethan could have laughed too. If Ryan had pulled away in embarrassment, Ethan could have turned it into a story before morning. But Ryan remained calm and gentle, as if he understood that Ethan was standing on the edge of something fragile and dangerous, and he refused to be the reason it shattered. The crowd reached zero and exploded into cheers. Someone clapped. Someone whistled. Mason shouted something that made everyone laugh. Ethan stepped back at once, smiling automatically, but the smile felt painted onto his face. His lips tingled. His hand was still on Ryan's shoulder. He realized it a second too late and pulled it away like he had touched a live wire. "Well," Ethan said, forcing a light laugh that scraped his throat on the way out. "Science has confirmed it. Ryan Carter is not made of stone. Maybe just very expensive marble." The room laughed again, exactly the way he needed them to. Ethan gave a small bow, pretending not to notice that his fingers were trembling, pretending not to notice that Ryan was not laughing, pretending not to notice the faint warmth spreading beneath the cuff of his left sleeve. Then the blocker slipped. Not completely, not enough for the entire room to understand at once, but enough for Ethan to feel the thin adhesive loosen against his skin, enough for a thread of his real scent to escape into the heavy air. It was soft at first, barely there, rain on warm pavement, honey under glass, panic wrapped in sweetness. Ethan froze. His breath caught. The living room suddenly felt too small, too hot, too full of alpha attention. The laughter blurred into a dull roar. The blue party lights stretched into streaks. Every scent in the room crashed into him at once. Sharp, sweet, bitter, restless. His body understood danger before. His mind could name it. He pressed his palm over his wrist and tried to move toward the kitchen, but his knees weakened after 2 steps. "Ethan," Ryan said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just his name, spoken with a focus that cut straight through the noise. Ethan turned his head and tried to smile again. "Relax, Carter. I am fine." Ryan's eyes dropped to Ethan's covered wrist, then to his pale face, then to the careful smile that was already failing. He stepped forward, slow enough not to startle him, but certain enough that the students nearest them moved aside without being asked. "No," Ryan said quietly. "You are not." Ethan wanted to argue. He wanted to make another joke, something sharp and funny enough to save him. But the room tilted, and for the first time all night, no joke came. Ryan reached him before he fell into panic completely, holding out his jacket like a shield instead of a claim. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and steady. "Only if you choose to." Ethan looked at the party, at Mason's confused face, at the circle of watching students, then back at Ryan. The dare was over. The joke was over. And somehow, the scariest part was that Ryan was still waiting. Ethan chose Ryan because the alternative was standing in the middle of that room while every part of him came apart under fluorescent blue lights and curious eyes. He did not take Ryan's hand. That would have felt too honest. Instead, he nodded once, small and stiff, and let Ryan walk beside him as they moved through the living room. Ryan kept his body angled between Ethan and the crowd without touching him, using presence rather than pressure, silence rather than command. The students parted with uncertain whispers. Mason stood halfway up from the rug, his grin gone, one hand frozen around the deck of cards. Is he okay? Mason asked. Ethan opened his mouth to make it easy for everyone, to say something stupid about dramatic exits or allergic reactions to bad party playlists. Nothing came out. Ryan answered for him, calm and final. He needs air. Outside the living room, the hallway felt cooler, dimmer, and longer than Ethan remembered. Family photos of Mason and his brothers lined the walls, all sunburned smiles and 4th of July lake trips, a normal life pressed behind glass. Ethan focused on them because looking at Ryan felt impossible. The party noise faded behind a closed door, but Ethan's pulse did not slow. His scent blocker had loosened further. He could feel the patch lifting at one edge, useless and warm against his skin. Bathroom is on the left, Ethan muttered, trying to sound casual. I can fix it. Ryan stopped several feet away from him, careful as always. You can, he said. Or you can sit down first before your legs stop pretending. The words should have annoyed Ethan. Instead, they almost made him laugh, because Ryan had used his own language against him. Pretending. Ethan hated how well it fit. He leaned his shoulder against the wall and took a shallow breath. The hallway smelled like old wood, rain through an open window, and Ryan's controlled alpha scent held back with almost painful discipline. Not pushing, not demanding, just there, steady as a lighthouse seen through fog. You do this a lot? Ethan asked, forcing his voice into something sharp. Rescue dramatic omegas from party games? Ryan's gaze flicked to him, unreadable but not cold. No, lucky me then. Ethan. His name sounded different in Ryan's mouth outside the noise. Softer, heavier, stripped of all the performance Ethan usually wrapped around it. Ethan pressed his palm harder over his wrist. Do not do that. Do what? Say my name like I am about to break. Ryan was quiet for a moment. From behind the living room door came a burst of laughter, distant and unreal, as if the party belonged to another version of the night. I am saying it like I want you to know I am listening, Ryan said. That was worse. Kindness was always worse. Ethan looked away fast, blinking at the narrow staircase, the scattered shoes by the front door, the rain beginning to tap lightly against the porch windows. He had survived years by being funny enough that nobody asked the second question. Are you okay? Why are you scared? Who taught you to smile like that? Ryan Carter was standing too close to every question Ethan had buried. It was just a dare, Ethan whispered. No. It did not mean anything. Ryan did not answer right away, and the silence pressed harder than any accusation could have. Ethan finally looked at him. Ryan was watching him with the same restraint he had shown during the kiss, the same quiet refusal to take more than Ethan offered. Then why are you still shaking? Ryan asked. Ethan's breath caught. The joke he reached for collapsed before it formed. His fingers curled around the failing blocker, and for one terrible second, he wanted to rip it off and stop hiding. Instead, he slid down the wall until he was sitting on the hallway floor, knees drawn close. Ryan's jacket still draped over his shoulders like a promise he had not agreed to believe. Ryan crouched several feet away, giving him space, giving him choice. Tell me what you need, Ryan said. Ethan stared at the rain streaking the window and gave the only honest answer he had left. I do not know how. Ryan did not move closer after Ethan admitted the truth. That was the first thing Ethan noticed, and maybe the reason he did not run. Most people heard weakness and tried to fill the space with advice, comfort, questions, or pity. Ryan simply stayed where he was, crouched several feet away on the hallway floor, one arm resting loosely over his knee, his scent held low and even. Outside, the rain strengthened against the windows, turning the porch light into a blurred gold halo. Behind the living room door, the party tried to continue, but the laughter sounded careful now, as if everyone inside knew something had shifted and did not know how to name it. Ethan kept his knees close to his chest, Ryan's jacket heavy over his shoulders, the fabric still carrying that clean trace of winter cedar. It should have made him panic. Instead, it quieted the wild, scattered edges of him. That frightened him more than the overload had. There is a first aid room upstairs, Ryan said after a while. Mason's mother used to be a school nurse. She keeps supplies there for parties. Ethan gave a weak laugh. Of course you know that. I notice things. No kidding. The joke barely survived. Ethan looked down at the scent blocker on his wrist. One corner had peeled. Back completely, exposing pale skin marked by the faint red square of adhesive. It looked small and pathetic for something that had controlled so much of his life. He pressed it down again, but it would not stay. "I hate this," he whispered. Ryan's expression did not change, but something in his eyes softened. The blocker. Needing it. Ethan swallowed. Needing anything. For the first time, Ryan looked away, not because he was uncomfortable, but because he seemed to understand too well. "That is different." "Is it?" Ethan asked. "You do not need anything. You walk around like someone built you in a lab to make the rest of us feel unstable." Ryan's mouth curved faintly, but it was not a smile of amusement. "That is not what control feels like." Ethan lifted his head. Ryan was looking at the staircase now, his jaw tense beneath the dim hallway light. "It feels like standing still because you are afraid one wrong step will hurt someone. It feels like measuring every breath before you take it. It feels like people calling you calm when you are just tired." Ethan forgot what he had been about to say. The words landed somewhere quiet and bruised inside him. He had spent months imagining Ryan as impossible, untouchable, immune. Maybe that had been easier than admitting Ryan was lonely too. "Then why do you always look at me like that?" Ethan asked, the question escaping before he could turn it into something safer. Ryan's eyes returned to his. "Like what?" Ethan laughed once, breathless and cornered. "Like you already know the punchline before I say it." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of rain, distant music, the soft buzz of the hallway light, and the heartbeat Ethan could not hide from himself. Ryan stood slowly and took one step back, giving Ethan more space instead of less. "Because I know you are not joking half the time," he said. Ethan went still. Ryan's voice remained low, careful, steady. "I know you check the exits before you sit down. I know you pretend to drink at parties so people stop asking. I know you use humor when you want someone to stop looking too closely. And I know you have been wearing blockers that are too cheap for crowded alpha spaces since September." Ethan's face went cold. "You knew?" "Yes." The honesty should have felt like betrayal. Instead, it felt like a door opening in a room Ethan had been trapped in for years. "And you never said anything?" Ryan's gaze held his, clear and almost painful. "It was not mine to say." Ethan stared at him, the failing blocker forgotten beneath his palm. All this time, he had thought Ryan saw through him because Ryan was an alpha and Ethan was bad at hiding. But that was not it. Ryan had seen him and chosen silence, not because he did not care, but because he cared enough not to take the choice away. Ethan's throat tightened. "So the kiss did not make you notice me?" Ryan shook his head once. "No, then what did?" Ryan looked at him for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice was so quiet Ethan almost missed it. "The first week of class. You made everyone laugh after Professor Hale embarrassed that freshman. You acted like it was nothing, but you moved your chair closer to him so he would not feel alone." Ethan blinked fast, but his vision blurred anyway. He remembered that day. He had forgotten anyone else could. Ryan turned toward the stairs, still leaving the decision in Ethan's hands. "Come upstairs. We can fix the blocker, or take it off for a few minutes in a room with a window open. Your choice." Ethan looked at Ryan's outstretched jacket sleeve, not a hand demanding to be taken, just a path offered without force. For once, he did not make a joke. He stood. The upstairs hallway was quieter, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel honest. Ethan followed Ryan past two closed bedroom doors and a framed college pennant hanging crooked on the wall. The floorboards creaked beneath their shoes. Downstairs, the party had softened into a muffled pulse, music and voices buried under rain. Mason's first aid room turned out to be a tiny spare bedroom with a desk, a folded treadmill, a metal cabinet, and one narrow window cracked open to the wet spring night. Cool air slipped inside, carrying the scent of soaked grass and pavement. Ethan stopped just past the doorway, suddenly aware of how small the room was, how close. Ryan felt even while standing near the hall. Ryan noticed. Of course he noticed. "I can wait outside," he said. Ethan almost said yes. It would have been easier, safer. But Ryan had spent the entire night giving him doors instead of walls, and something in Ethan was tired of running through every exit just to end up alone. "Stay by the door," Ethan said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Ryan nodded once and leaned against the doorframe, arms loose at his sides, posture careful. Ethan sat on the edge of the old twin bed and peeled the blocker from his wrist. The adhesive pulled at his skin with a tiny sting, but the relief was immediate and terrifying. His real scent unfolded slowly into the room, rain warmed by sunlight, honey strained through fear, something soft that had been trapped too long. Ethan closed his eyes, ashamed of how exposed he felt. "Do not say anything," he whispered. "I was not going to. You are thinking something. I am thinking you have been hurting yourself trying to disappear." Ethan opened his eyes. The words were not dramatic. They were worse than dramatic. They were true. He looked down at the red mark on his wrist and laughed once without humor. "You make it sound tragic. It is just campus life. People are weird around Omegas. I learned to be less obvious." Ryan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "Less obvious is not the same as safe." Ethan looked at him then, really looked. Ryan Carter, the perfect alpha everyone trusted because he never cracked, was standing in the doorway with rain light in his dark hair and something helpless in his blue eyes. Not helpless because he lacked power, but because he refused to use it wrong. That realization moved through Ethan more deeply than the kiss had. "Why did you not kiss me back?" Ethan asked suddenly. Ryan went still. Ethan regretted the question at once, but there was no taking it back. "I mean downstairs. Everyone expected you to make it funny or weird or whatever. You just stood there." Ryan's gaze did not leave his face. "Because you were performing for them." Ethan swallowed. "And if I had not been?" The rain filled the room for a long second. Ryan looked away. First, toward the open window, his profile cut clean and pale in the dim light. "Then I still would have waited until you were not scared." Ethan's chest hurt in a way that felt dangerously close to hope. He wanted to turn it into a joke. He wanted to say something sharp about Ryan sounding like a public service announcement for respectful alphas. But his throat would not cooperate. All he could do was sit there with his bare wrist in his lap and the truth between them, fragile and bright. "So what happens now?" Ethan asked. "You save the unstable Omega, walk me back downstairs, and pretend this was a medical emergency?" Ryan's eyes returned to him. "No, no." Ryan stepped back from the doorway, not toward Ethan, but farther away, giving him even more room. "Now you decide what this was." Ethan blinked. "That is unfair. Choice usually feels that way when nobody has given it to you before." The words landed so gently that Ethan almost missed the blow. His eyes burned, and he hated it. He hated that Ryan knew exactly where to be kind. "You are making it very hard to keep being annoying," Ethan said. Ryan's mouth softened. "I know." For the first time all night, Ethan smiled without armor. It was small and shaky and real. Ryan saw it, and something in his expression changed. Not possession, not triumph, but wonder. Ethan looked at the fresh blocker Ryan had found in the cabinet, then at the open window, then at the alpha waiting across the room like Dawn had all the time in the world. Slowly, Ethan left the new blocker on the desk. 5 minutes, he said. "I want 5 minutes without hiding." Ryan nodded, and his voice was barely above the rain. "I will be right here." 5 minutes became the longest quiet Ethan had ever survived. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed with Ryan's jacket still around his shoulders and the open window breathing rain into the room, and nothing terrible happened. No one burst in laughing. No alpha tried to turn his exposed scent into a spectacle. No part of the world ended because Ethan Miller stopped pretending for one small stretch of time. His real scent filled the room softly, not loud, not dangerous, not shameful. It was just him. That almost broke him more than fear had. Ryan remained across the room, exactly where he had promised to be, one shoulder against the wall, hands visible, eyes lowered whenever Ethan needed space and lifted whenever Ethan needed proof he was not alone. Downstairs, the party slowly returned to itself, but it sounded different now, less like a place Ethan had failed to survive and more like a place he did not have to return to until he was ready. "I thought it would feel worse," Ethan admitted after a while. Ryan looked up. "What would?" "Being known." The answer came out small, honest, and unfinished. Ethan stared at the unused blocker on the desk. For years, he had believed safety was something he could stick to his wrist, press down hard, and pray would last through the night. But sitting there with rain on the windowsill and Ryan waiting without asking for anything, Ethan wondered if safety could also be a person who did not move closer just because he could. Ryan's voice was quiet. "It should not hurt to be yourself." Ethan laughed softly, but this time the sound did not cut. "You say things like that and expect me not to panic." "No. I expect you to panic and stay anyway. Ethan looked at him, startled. Ryan's expression held no challenge, only patience. That was the moment Ethan realized Ryan had never been trying to win him. He had been trying to leave enough room for Ethan to choose him without fear. The thought settled in Ethan's chest like a match struck in the dark. When the 5 minutes ended, Ethan picked up the fresh blocker, turned it over in his hand, and placed it in his pocket instead of on his skin. Ryan noticed, but said nothing. Ethan stood, legs steadier than before. "Do not look so proud," he said, and the joke came back softer, less like armor and more like a ribbon tied around something real. Ryan's mouth curved faintly. "I would never." They walked downstairs together near 2 in the morning. The party had thinned. Mason watched them from the couch, guilt written all over his face, but Ethan lifted one hand before anyone could apologize too loudly. "Bad dare," Ethan said. "Good hallway. Complicated night. We are moving on." It was not graceful, but it was enough. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Ethan left Mason's house wearing Ryan's jacket, his own blocker still and used in his pocket, the early sky pale pink over Briar Ridge. Ryan walked beside him all the way to the dorms, never touching, never rushing, never making the silence feel empty. At the front steps, Ethan finally stopped. "So what happens when everyone talks?" Ryan looked toward the campus green, where wet grass glittered under the rising sun. "They will talk. That is your whole plan." "No." Ryan turned back to him, calm as ever, but his eyes were warm now in a way Ethan had never seen in the classroom or across crowded rooms. "My plan is to let them ask me. I am done pretending I do not care." Ethan forgot how to breathe for the second time that night, but this time it did not feel like panic. It felt like the first honest beginning he had ever been offered. He looked down at the jacket around his shoulders, then back at Ryan, and for once, he did not hide behind the easy joke. "Then wait for me after class," Ethan said. Ryan's answer came without hesitation. "I will." And when Ethan walked into his dorm as the sun rose over campus, he realized the dare had not ruined his life at all. It had only ended the lie that he was easier to love from a distance.